What's up guys, welcome back to my channel. So if you guys are following me on Instagram, then you know that I wanted to film a Q&A video, basically just getting a little bit more conversational and open with you guys about the topic of racism and with everything going on in the US and things like that have been going on and are continuing to be getting media attention. I have just been praying offline of just like, God, how do you want me to show up? You know, like, how do you want me to use my platform and my socials essentially? Like, what do you want me to do? And I feel like he was like, well, girl, you've been talking about getting more honest and open with your audience and just being vulnerable. So he's like, have a conversation, girl. So basically, I just felt that I wanted to do a Q&A just so you guys can hear more about my experience, if you guys are wondering how I grew up and like all of the different things and how, yeah, basically just getting my perspective on things. Again, being fully transparent and honest, I did have reservations filming this video, and I was kind of fearful that this would be kind of viewed more as like a handout, or like that my kindness and trying to have a very civil, open, educational conversation would be taken advantage of. And so I just want to say thank you to you guys for everyone who asked questions. I felt like the questions were very good questions and just things that you wanted either to know how I grew up, my experiences, and how those shaped me, and just like things from my perspective or wanting a Christian perspective on certain topics. So I did appreciate that, and I feel like we can just go ahead and dive in. So I'm using my phone because I just have a list of questions and I just want to make sure that I read them correctly. And I kind of grouped some together because a lot of things were asking pretty similar questions. But yeah, let's just go ahead and get started. So if I look down, that's literally why. So question number one is, can you share your experience growing up in an area without many Black people? So just to set the scene for you guys so you understand like how I grew up and where I came from and all of those things. So I was born in London and I lived there for 10 years. My parents are both West African, they're both from Ghana, and then they moved to London, had me and my sister, we lived there, grew up, cool. So the way I grew up was a very traditional African household. From the food we ate, they spoke Twi, which is the language over there, or one of the languages. You know, they're more authoritative as parents. We definitely had all of that. Everyone we also were around were Ghanaians as well. And so growing up, I just had a lot of family that we would interact with. People that I now know are not my cousins, but they're just like my friends. They would always be at our house and vice versa. We would do prayer meetings and all of that. So that's the experience I got from a really, really young age. But then also I did go to school. I went to a private all-girls school in London, and so that's when I obviously was exposed to different cultures and different people. I remember, yeah, our school was predominantly white, but we also had a lot of Indians and Middle Easterns and just like different people with different religions and backgrounds. So I do kind of remember getting like, just seeing a lot of different things, and I was young at the time, so nothing negative happened as a result of that, if that makes sense. It was just like, cool, everyone's everyone, cool. Then fast forward to moving to the US, my family and I ended up moving to California. So we moved to a affluent neighborhood in San Diego, and so that's when my experience became very surrounded by a lot of white people. And so though the area that we grew up in was predominantly white, like in my high school, there were 3 Black people, I think, and one of them was my sister. So definitely not a lot of representation there. And also we were the only ones that moved. So we didn't have a lot of family here. And I think my mom had like a sister or something, and she was all the way in New York. So our immediate circle was literally just kind of like my family. Still raised the same way, still in the African household, doing all of that, and then everyone and everything else, you know? And so I will say though our area was predominantly white, I felt like the high school that I went to, there was at least more representation than how I feel in Texas, and I'll get there. But for example, so my best friends were Persian, Mexican, Vietnamese, white. So I did feel like I at least got to grasp just like a little bit of diversity in that way. And in my friend group specifically, we, like I said, came from all different cultures, and so we also really celebrated that. So a lot of my high school experience is going to Persian parties and celebrating New Year's with them and being with their family and eating their food and trying to speak Farsi and like, you know, all of that stuff. And then also being with my Vietnamese friend and like her family. inviting me to their functions and like being around all of that and just learning different things there. So though I absolutely was a minority and there was very, very minimal Black representation, I also did feel though that at the same time, the experience I got was that people had different cultures and people were grown up and raised different ways, but it's not a bad thing or anything. It's that's something to be celebrated. So I felt that my experience brought a lot of different cultures together, and we as a friend group kind of just celebrated all of them. I will say though, the one thing I do regret is not being as open with my culture to outsiders as they were to me, or like to my friends and stuff like that. Okay, sorry, this battery died, and the reason why I say that is because growing up, while we were trying to like assimilate to the American culture, like my parents and I had a lot of like discourse. Nothing so dramatic, but more of like, they were trying to raise us one way, like how they knew how, of being more authoritative and this and that. Whereas in America, we were seeing more like relational type structures and like friendship in parents, and that's just something pretty different. And so we would butt heads a lot, where I'd be like, hey guys, like, hey you guys, do this or whatever, and they'd be like, you guys, like, am I your classmate? Like, you know, it would just be like weird friction that we would have just based on how we were growing up. And so I just remember kind of being more like closed off, and like, and I also think I negatively interpreted things like that on my culture and made me feel a certain type of way towards it. And so, I mean, my parents, we've had several conversations after the fact, and like, we're all like great, but it's one of those things where you can only really go through it to then have that hindsight view. So, but I guess I will say that to kids, if you're watching this, or if anyone's in high school or anything like that, and you do have a culture that's different from your peers, or you are feeling embarrassed or anything like that, literally just celebrate it, bring people in, bring them along. I know it's easier to say that now, but it's all those things of us caring what people think and being judged for doing things a certain way and all of that stuff that makes us want to hide the best parts of ourselves. But I feel like one of the best parts about me and the way I grew up in my culture is the fact that I'm from Ghana and like have that whole experience, you know? And so it just makes me sad to think that there was so much of my life that I didn't, or I was only vocal about that within my own house, you know? And so I guess that's just one thing I would say. I know it's one of those things that you may not believe me at the time. In hindsight, you'll agree, but just in case you're listening, totally just celebrate your culture, be proud of where you're from, and own it. Okay, because I know the world might tell you otherwise, but anyway. So then that's kind of my experience, and then Texas was kind of a whole different ballgame, but I'll get into that later because I think that was the next question. So, or it will kind of tie into other questions. But question number 2 is, when did you first begin to realize that your experience of the world was different because of the color of your skin? So I think it's a great question, and I know specifically the answer. It was 7th grade. So 5th grade was my first time being here in school. Cool. 6th grade, I lost my accent. Great. 7th grade is where I feel like I totally remember comments that were made to me, or seeing a shift in how people were treating me because of my skin. And so I don't know what it is about 7th grade. I feel like that's also where we get way more ballsy and we're more bullying towards each other, and everyone else just kind of wants to be cool, and like nobody really says anything and everyone kind of goes along with it. But I do remember specifically getting comments like, oh, you're so dark, you get lost in the dark, or, you know, just like stupid comments like that. Or I also definitely remember getting a lot of like fried chicken, Kool-Aid, watermelon type jokes. And given context, again, like I said, I was from the UK, my family was from Ghana. So those comments, I honestly was at a point where I didn't understand them. At the time, I didn't know why specifically people were telling me that. Obviously, I knew, okay, like they think it's a black thing, but I didn't know what that black thing literally meant. Obviously now in like years past, I understand that those comments are related to slavery, but I was exposed to an African Ghanaian culture. And so that's where little things were difficult for me to understand as a child, because I was confused as to what that was. You know, I just remember being like, okay, cool, I like fried chicken, like fried chicken is bomb, and like, yeah, watermelon, like, you know, put some tahini on it, it's like a delicious snack. Like Kool-Aid, don't know what that is, but cool, like, you know. But then I also definitely remember though that like these comments though were not used in an endearing way or anything like that. It absolutely was used in a derogatory tone and trying to like belittle me or make me feel negative about who I was being Black, you know what I mean? So definitely did experience comments, and that was when my brain started to shift and realize, okay, like these aren't positive, you know? So it's like, okay, so they have a perception of what Black people are like, and in America it's not a good thing. Like that's just like where it started to like kind of track in my mind. I also got a lot of backhanded compliments, and at the time I didn't have a term for it. I didn't know that that's what microaggressions were. I just remember feeling some type of way about these comments and not really grasping why. Like I just remember being like, thank you, question mark. So I would get things like, oh, you're so pretty for a Black girl, or like you speak so eloquently, or like you're not like the other ones, or like we like you, like you're cool, you dress this way, and stuff like that, or you know, you're smart. Like, you know, at face value you think like that sounds like something nice, but all I'm hearing is like, that's what I'm saying. If I would be like, thank you, question mark, because I just was like, what is that supposed to mean? And that's just kind of how I always felt like when I received comments about that, because I'd just be like, what is that supposed to mean? Okay, so you think I talk a certain way, but what way am I supposed to talk? Because like I came from the UK, I was speaking more formal English than you were. I never said like, you know, I'm just like, how was I supposed to sound? Like that's just where I grew up. Or that I'm smart. So like essentially all that to say is that that's when it started triggering to me that, okay, white people have a preconceived notion or a perception of how Black people should be. I didn't fit that perception, and therefore I wasn't Black enough. I also got comments of like, yeah, like you're not acting Black, you're not Black enough, you're an Oreo, which is like white on the inside and Black on the outside, like all of those things. And that's essentially what they were saying. But then when you hear that, that's literally saying that they think that Black people aren't pretty, that being Black means you're not educated, that being Black means you're not smart, you can't speak eloquently, like all of those things. And so that's when I was just like, WTF, you know? And like it was also the weirdest thing, because of these people that were saying this, like were like my friends and stuff. So that's what was confusing, is because they honestly, truly, like, I don't think they even realized what they were saying when they were saying it. They weren't trying to come at it from a malicious standpoint. They were trying to prove that they were accepting of me. But by doing that, you see how you're completely being offensive and sharing or showcasing how you view African Americans and Black people. And so that's what was like really disheartening. And like, that's the stuff that would stick with me. And I remember just thinking, okay, so the friends that I have now, they like me, they accept me, you know, I'm similar to them, I kind of speak in a way that they can understand, and like we kind of resemble each other's upbringing. But I remember thinking, okay, but what if I didn't? What if I did talk a certain way? What if I did dress a certain way? What if I, you know, X, Y, Z? Would they be friends with me? And that's just what made me realize, like, dang, like that really made me insecure, because I was being like, though I was accepted and, you know, people liked me and stuff, it just made me feel like, okay, but what if I presented myself with a different countenance? Like, would I have a completely different experience? And I absolutely would have. And that's the part that was messed up, because in my head, I'm like, but I would have been the same person inside. So you wouldn't have even like gone there, you know? And so that's the stuff that like really like messed me up as a kid. And I internalized all of this. Let me say, like, nobody probably knew I felt this way, or I didn't vocalize this by any means. This is the stuff that I would kind of like pick up and didn't know what to do with this information. So I would internalize it, suppress it. And literally to this day, it's taken me a lot of time and years to kind of work through all those things, because people who know me, but here we are being transparent. One of my biggest fears, and it also really matches with the Enneagram 2, which I am, but it's, you know, the fear of not being loved and not being fully known and loved for 100% of who you are. And so that honestly stems all the way back to comments like that, where I would be like, what does that mean, you know? And so as a side note, guys, I just mentioned something like where I said that like people called me an Oreo and stuff, and the Oreo complex is also something that a lot of Black people struggle with and internalize, and don't necessarily feel like they have a platform or a resource to speak and like process through that. And so one of my friends sent me a podcast by Balanced Black Girl, and it was called The Oreo Complex. So if what I just said kind of resonates with how you guys grew up, Black people I'm talking to you specifically right now, or things that you experienced in your childhood, etc., listen to that podcast, because I feel like it just really put into words things that I've experienced and felt and just like didn't even know how to like classify it or put words to it. And I think especially because it's like you're not really going to talk to a white person about it, you're also kind of sometimes scared to talk to a Black person about it, because what if they are joking with you too and kind of like validate that and go, well girl, you are white, you know, like that's hurtful too, and then you're feeling like, you know, rejection from all communities. And so I would highly recommend that. And if you can find people that you can talk to about it, you can talk to me, you know, whatever, but try and continue to dig deeper on that complex if this is something that pertains to you, and like do the work to uncover things there, because it really does affect you, and it affects a lot of how you navigate spaces. And I just think that it's something that should be spoken more about and worked through. So yeah, I will have that linked down in the description box below. Definitely check out that podcast. Okay, next question is, how was your experience in a mostly white university and then sorority? Okay, I should have thought about these questions beforehand. Let's see if I can kind of sum it up. So my experience at a predominantly white school, I went to TCU, if you guys don't know, Texas Christian University. It was a complete shift. I remember it being a complete culture shock. I had never been to the South before. I didn't know anything like that. So my first experience of being in America is in a really liberal state. I went to a really liberal school. My high school was really artsy, and you know, everyone was really accepting of each other. Like people literally wore like no shoes, belly dancing outfits, and like banana suits, and like nobody said anything, you know what I mean? Like nobody even thought you were that weird. All the way coming to Texas, where it's a more conservative school and state, you know, they also have extreme Texas pride. You know, people are preppy, they dress different, guys look different, girls look different. Like I just remember being so confused. And like a prime example, like I went, it was orientation, and they were like, oh yeah, you can two-step in that room, and I literally was like, okay, like I thought we're about to be like a two-step, no, what you two, like, and then it's literally them being like dun, 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 you know, maybe lock them doors or whatever. And I was just like, oh, what's two-stepping? Like, you know, it was just, everything was a culture shock. But specifically my experience like being Black there, I would say, okay, full transparency, this is just kind of how I approached going to that school. So as you guys can see, the majority of my life in the US was around white people. So I got used to being the only Black person in a room. It wasn't like a weird concept to me. You know, I was just used to playing that role, if I'm being honest. So going to a white school like that, that wasn't so much the shock that other people were white. It was more of, I just felt like a lot of people were more closed-minded, not as open to diversity or like different types of people, but it seemed like everyone was honestly trying to be the same person, because that's what was accepted, that was what was cool, and that was how things were. So I remember even just like down to the way people dressed, I was always so confused why everyone looked the same. And I was like, do people not have different vibes? And obviously I'm kind of generalizing, but I just remember thinking that, because I remember I went to a high school where people wanted to be different. Like people tried honestly so hard to be so different from everyone else. So it was just weird seeing that everyone wearing the same thing and having the same vibe, I guess. The big t-shirts though, I did love that, kept that, that was great. I don't know how I ever wore an extra small. XLs for the win. But yeah, I just remember being so shocked. But I also did have a conscious thought that like, okay, this is basically how I felt. I felt like I was like, this is a whole different ball game than what I'm used to. Let's just go. Let's go to Cowtown, Fort Worth. Let's do that experience and then get out. I literally had the thought that like, that's where I was gonna do my 4 years, but I was gonna go home to California every 3 to 6 months, you know, and just live my life in California after. So I kind of viewed it more as like, not like an experiment, but I kind of was just like, let's just go all in, let's do this cowboy thing. Oh, sorry, I'm kind of like hopping around, but being in a white sorority, for example, Like I said, it wasn't weird in the fact that I was used to being around white people. My specific sorority that I joined with, I did it because I really liked their personality. I actually felt like I could be myself and that they saw me and they appreciated me and all of that stuff. However, there absolutely were other sororities at TCU that I was just like, nope, nope, nope. Like, they either all felt just like not my vibe at all, really made up, done up, whatever. They were all really super Southern, or they were all blondes, or came from Texas or a specific zip code. Like, there were just certain things that I was like, that's not for me. My sorority specifically felt like they had tons of different types of people, even though they were majority white, but like they had different types of personalities and vibes, and I was like, okay, I feel like I could like be here. Talking back to like kind of like the sorority experience and guys and things like that, I kind of just, again, like I said, I had an attitude where it was just like TCU was for the girls, because a lot of stuff was like, that's not it, that's not it, that's not it. And I didn't feel like a huge need to conform. There is definitely things that rubbed me the wrong way, where there were super Southern frats that I just didn't have any business with, because in my heart of hearts, I just felt like they were racist, and that's just point blank period. There were certain houses I would go into and there would just be like a Confederate flag chilling there like it was like home decor. And I would just kind of remember walking in being like, like, do you know what, do you, you know? So it's little things, it's not little, but it's like things like that that would just like rub me the wrong way and make me feel like I gotta get out of here. But for the most part, like, it was an okay experience. Like, I wouldn't change it. And the reason why I say I wouldn't change it is because not only do I have lifelong friends from going there, but I also, that was where I feel like I realized that I was totally 1 foot in, 1 foot out with my faith. And my senior year, I was like, I just had such an awakening where it was just like, you need to get it together, you need to follow the Lord. So that's honestly why I feel like I ended up at that school. And I feel like God totally like made me feel certain things, or allowed me to feel certain things, so that I would get to a point where I'm like, this isn't satisfying me, this is not what I want in life, I need you, Lord, you know? So for those reasons, I wouldn't change it or take it back, but there absolutely were things that I didn't like. And if I were to do it again, I think I absolutely would be more confident in who I was and myself, in order to create an environment that was representative of what was important to me. So being able to stand up and not go to certain parties, but hang out with people that weren't in sororities, or to hang out with people that I think I would probably be more friends with to this day, whether or not they were cool, or just, you know, being more authentic to who I was. I think that's my one regret. And I think by doing that, I would have had a much more diverse population of friends, because a lot of Black people I knew weren't even in Greek life, and a lot of my life was in Greek life. So I feel like, do you see what I'm saying? I wish I prioritized relationships and friendships that I think I would have still had to this day. Okay, next question is, should we ask people why they don't want to support Black Lives Matter? So that's actually an interesting question, and I'm gonna assume that when you say people, you mean people you know. And to that I say, yeah, I mean, why not, you know? But I will say communication and delivery is really important when you're having these conversations, especially if you're trying to educate someone or get them to see your point of view. And so I think there are just really simple questions that you can ask to have a healthy conversation, especially if you are trying to figure out why someone isn't on your side or supporting Black Lives Matter. Okay, so for example, you know, if someone says something that feels like anti-Black Lives Matter, or that they're not supportive, you can say, hey, like, what do you mean by that? You know, and then this is how you're listening, right? So simply asking, hey, what do you mean by that? Then it helps you figure out why they came to that conclusion, or why they said something. And that will help you realize that, okay, maybe they just made an ignorant statement. Okay, they actually didn't mean what they said, but it came out in a way that was offensive, so I can tell them why that's offensive. Yeah, they're just racist, and that's what it is. But, you know, at least it tells you, like, where they're coming from. You know, and then from there you can ask, well, how did you come to that conclusion? And that tells you the why behind what they said, you know? So it really goes deeper, and so you can see. So a lot of people might say things and it alludes that their family was raised a certain way, and they're just taking what they learned from their parents, you know? it just dives deeper basically, and you can figure out where people are coming from. Someone might have had a bad experience with one Black person, and now they're projecting that experience on all Black people, which isn't right, and that's something that you could speak to, you know. And then lastly, I would just say, well, have you considered? And then boom, that's where you insert your opinions, your facts, your beliefs, your statements, your Bible scriptures, and have an open discourse. And maybe they'll also be able to see where you're coming from as well, because you've understood where they're coming from, and you're able to change your approach to kind of address those things. Because the reason I say that is just like, I feel like this is just listening 101, and it allows people to open up and really get the heart behind what they're saying. But my main reason in saying that is because my assumption of what someone meant, I will address that in a completely different way than figuring out that what if they really meant is something different than what I was assuming they were coming from, you know? Not to say that what they said was right or is right or whatever, but it just helps you understand where people are coming from, so that you can have a discussion that's healthy and productive and actually like gets to the point, you know? So I would just recommend, yeah, I think that you should ask people. I don't see why there's anything wrong with that. I would want to know why my friend doesn't, if that's how I felt, or if I felt like they were posting things that were alluding to non-support. So I would ask, absolutely. Okay, next question. Okay, this one was kind of a long one, and so I'm just gonna sum it up because it's too long to read. But just a little backstory: this person that asked this question is not from the US, and so I thought that was just a little bit interesting, because I wonder if maybe either how the media is portraying the US, or maybe like what it looks like, how things are happening from afar might be different than how we're experiencing it in the US. Like, I don't know, I just thought that was an interesting factor. But basically they started off this question by saying they heard what happened with George Floyd. They think that the police officer is wrong and should be punished, and the ones that were also involved and like didn't do anything. Then they said, however, and basically went on to list certain things like, what about Black on Black crime? What about the Black statistics of robberies or things like that? Basically, you know, I feel like we're defining racism and prejudice as the same thing. We should separate those. And basically just alluding to the matters that police brutality is being amplifying something that feels small compared to the bigger issue, if that makes sense. Basically saying that like it seems like we're focusing on something small and we're not seeing the bigger picture. And I'm gonna be honest, I feel like if anyone got that question, that's something that I feel like can really set you off and really make you want to say like WTF, you know? But the reason I want to answer this question is because if I'm going to be honest, I feel like this person is just saying what a lot of people low-key feel. And that is what's scary to me, but that's why I also want to address it. And so to me, I think, okay, let's talk about this then. I'm not going to go down the line and address each little thing that this person said, because to me, the bigger picture of this question is more of a heart posture, and I want to address that part. But I will just say this. So like when I see people make arguments like this, or I read questions like this, what I want to say is this honestly comes back to Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter type of a sentiment, where just because we are focusing on one specific issue, we're specifically focusing on police brutality in America, that does not mean that there are not other issues going on, and that does not mean that we are ignorant to those issues and that we're negating them. You know what I'm saying? Just because we're focusing on police brutality, it just means that we are focusing specifically here. If we can fix and address the fact that a Black person is getting unjustly murdered at the hands of a white police officer over and over and over again with no consequences or no structure for justice, you know, that's what we're addressing. And if we can fix that, we can continue to move on and find solutions to other issues. So taking that Black on Black crime one as just an example, like she mentioned. Okay, you guys, sorry, my battery is just dying all over the place. So I honestly forget where I was, but I think I was talking about Black on Black crime, like that comment. So let's just talk about that, for example. So we know that if a Black person kills a Black person, what happens? Like that Black person goes to jail, right? But if a white person kills a Black person, we've seen time and time again that that result is not the same. But unfortunately, it's not until millions of people are signing protests and social media is going crazy and we are all in uproar, making noise, demanding justice, then does someone, you know, I don't know, get fired or actually go to jail. And so that's what we're talking about. So it's like, if we can fix stuff like that, we can continue to move on and tackle and find solutions and resolutions to all the different issues. We're not saying that there's no other issues, you know what I mean? And so I just hope that because this person was right in saying, like, you know, education is an issue. Absolutely, education. We know housing, we know food systems, we know healthcare. Like, there's so many things that are a factor. So there is so much to address. So that person's not wrong in that, but focusing on something specific isn't negating everything else and doesn't mean that other things were not like apparent too. Does that make sense? Okay, I hope that clears that up a little bit. So the last question that I got is, how do white people support Black people? And they also wanted to know a Christian perspective on that. So there's so many different answers to that, but I do want to kind of just simplify it and just give you, like, you know, 3 little things that I feel like encompass everything. So starting with the Christian perspective first, I'm just going to read out of Matthew 22, 37 and 38. And so he said to them, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and most important command. The second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself." And so from a Christian perspective, I think that God was very specific in making the greatest commandments appear and seem very simple. But what God is saying is that if you love God and then you love people as a result, you're encompassing everything. You know, loving your neighbor as yourself encompasses everything. Doing that is what is going to help us give to the poor. Doing that is what's going to help us fight for the oppressed. Doing that is what's going to help us, you know, be involved in seeking justice and helping people going through, you know, sex trafficking and orphans and, you know, people having a hard day. Like, whatever it is, loving our neighbors as ourselves encompasses that. So racism is not exempt from that. You know what I'm saying? So when it comes to what you can do to support your Black friends, I'm just gonna break it down into 3 categories, which I also feel like encompass a lot of things. But one is acknowledgement. I think for so long, your Black friends or people you may know, or, you know, just acquaintances, whatever, or even strangers, have felt as if that people are not listening, and that it almost is getting, or was getting, to the point where it felt like people thought we were like making it up or something, as if, like, you know, racism doesn't exist. I remember when things would kind of happen, or, you know, I remember being vocal about being like, I think that's a racist issue, and just kind of getting brushed off as like, no, like, it's 2020, or like, no, I think it was because of this, and not acknowledging that racism still exists in the US and is, you know, not a fictitious thing, right? And so I think acknowledgement, you know, whenever there's a headline of another Black person dying at the hands of a white person, that affects your Black friend. They are going through it emotionally. They are, you know, going through whatever stage of grief, whether it's anger, sadness, resentment, like all of the feelings, you know, it's affecting them. Although it may not be happening to their specific immediate family or anything, it is essentially having the same weight as that. So check in on your Black friends, acknowledge what is happening. Don't wait for them to have to speak up on these issues for you to stand in solidarity with them. And with that acknowledgement, I would also add a little caveat to it in saying that don't make that acknowledgement about yourself either, and don't take it personally. And what I mean by that is, your Black friend, and I'm only speaking from my perspective, but like I said, everyone's going to handle this very differently. There are different responses to how people handle this type of news. You know, some of my friends have been very numb and just very like, I can't. Some people have been like, okay, I'm schooling everyone, we're all gonna get educated, let's all sit down in the line in the classroom. Other people are only talking to their Black friends about this because it's a safe space for them to vent and let things out without having to feel judgment or feel like they have to explain things to their white friends. So if you as a white person are reaching out and trying to enter that space with your Black friends, absolutely please do it. But what I'm saying is, don't take any offense as to the response you get. Like if you get a short answer, if they don't respond back to you for days or any of those things, just know that they see it, they appreciate it. And again, tailor your approach to whatever your friend is. Some people like gifts, buy them some flowers and let them know that you recognize that that day might be emotional, but you're thinking of them. Other people want to be able to talk. Other people need them to know that you're standing by them and need those words of affirmations. Know your friend, but just know that some acknowledgement is better than absolutely nothing. And the example that I kind of want to give and parallel these two situations with is something like, let's just say you are friends with someone who has lost a family member or a friend. And I hate to even say that, but I think it's a pretty universal example that will help you understand and also apply the same social cues when we're talking about race in America and things like that. So number one, how I said acknowledgement. That's the same thing that goes if you had a friend who lost someone. You recognize that saying something is better than not saying anything at all. And you also recognize that they are going through their own thing. They're on their own emotional journey. They are struggling, they're hurt, they are sad, all of those feelings, angry, everything. So you're not putting yourself in the equation and you're not caring how they respond to you or what they do, right? Because you know that they're going through it, so you have that understanding. So that's what I would say, step one, acknowledgement. Okay, number two, I would say do the work. So back to my analogy of someone losing a parent. You understand that they are going through and are about to go through a whole season of grieving. Though you can't relate because you may not have been in that situation and you haven't lost a parent yet. Let's just say you haven't, or a friend or a family, whatever. Let's just say you don't know what that feels like. Though you don't know what that feels like, you also, there are other resources and other podcasts and other platforms and other things to help you understand, where you're not going to that person and only expecting them to teach you. So while that friend, if they're open to talking about it, they want to give you a slice of their brain and they want to let you know what they're experiencing, absolutely have that conversation. I welcome that, whatever. But at the same time, you also, as a friend, can be supported by going offline, away from them, and doing work yourself. That could be reading books on grief. You know, that could be listening to podcasts that you might have skipped that episode because it didn't apply to you, but knowing that you can learn information to help your relationship with your friend. All of those things are you also taking an active role in being supportive for your friend. Do you see what I'm saying? And so that's the same thing when it comes to racism and being anti-racist, is that don't just look to your Black friend to share resources and kind of take from them, and then, you know, only if they say something do you then listen. And you might be willing to listen and soak it all up, but what's really telling is if you do that work outside of what they're providing to you, you know, that I think is really huge. And that takes a lot of emotional burdens off your Black friends to have to teach you, but that also shows to them that you really are trying to be an ally and that you are, you know, taking steps forward regardless of what they're doing and their influences on your life, and that's huge. I'm also going to take this analogy from Danny from Oh Happy Danny. If you guys are on Instagram, she has been the one that's been creating really, really beautiful graphics that are kind of like pastel and really just, you know, depict the heart behind the Black Lives Matter movement and really educates you on just racism and how to be anti-racist. So I'll have her Instagram link down below, and she also did a podcast on the Jamie Ivey podcast where you're able to see the heart behind her post and all of those things. So it was a really great episode. I highly encourage you guys to listen to it. I'll have it linked down below. But she basically said something that I was like, yes girl, absolutely, this is exactly how I feel. So she basically said, you know, we talking about racism and all of these things. It's like, okay, it's a seat at the table, come join the table, come join. And she's like, honestly, it's a train, you know, this is a train, this movement is going, you know, and we're not stopping and we're not slowing down. So if you hop on the train, you know, at different stops, that's great, nobody's mad, happy to be here, join the train. We want as many people to come on board as possible, but you may be at a different spot than other people are, right? So in the same way as like a classroom, let's say, if you walk in late to class, like 10 minutes late, what is the teacher gonna say? The teacher's gonna say, hey girl, thanks so much for being here, glad you could finally make it. But what does she do? She continues to teach from the spot that she was at. She doesn't then halt everything, look to you as a latecomer, educate you, take her time and resources and all of that, and then move back to the class. No, she keeps going and you listen from there, but then in your own time, you go back and you do the work and you catch yourself up. So that's kind of the approach that I feel like being an ally or supporting your Black friends, you should have. And again, every person is different. So you might have a friend that's so all about education and is really wanting to loop you in on all these conversations and teach you. Cool, great. Make sure you do stuff outside of that, but great, nobody's arguing that. But you also will have people who have a stance that are like, you're on your own, figure it out, you know, that's on you. And that's okay too. Everyone does this work differently. And what I don't want is for people to kind of like put those two together and like kind of think one way is better than the other way. They're all justified and they're all allowed. Just know that and then do your work, okay? And then lastly, I will just end off with this, is I think that it's commit for the long haul. You know, one of the fears that I feel like I've talked to a lot of my Black friends, and we've just kind of been like, it's the weirdest mix of emotions because we are so happy to see people finally celebrating Black voices, Black creators, Black artists, Black business owners, and all of those things. But there is this anxiety in us that at the same time, it's gonna die down and people are just gonna go back to normal. And it's just this weird feeling where it's almost like you're watching and you don't wanna get too excited because you feel like something's gonna get taken away from you, you know? And so again, if you're trying to support your Black friends, I would say commit for the long haul. Like, in the same way, back to my analogy, that person who's lost someone is going to be going through it for a whole season. That could take years, right? And as a Black person, until we see racism eradicated in our country, it's gonna be your lifetime, right? And so as a friend, oh my earring, but as a friend, the goal is that you're committing to go on that journey for the long haul. But I do wanna also acknowledge that nobody's perfect and you're gonna mess up, and every friendship's different. But I'll speak for myself, and again, someone was asking about the Christian perspective, where I'm not pointing fingers or like waiting for people to mess up to cancel them or anything. That's not what I'm doing. As humans, you're gonna mess up. There's always a lot of fear. I've heard a lot of white friends say, well, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I do this? Chances are you will. Like, let's just be real, you might say the wrong thing. But what I'm looking for is, if you're trying to be anti-racist and support your friends, continue. Say something, it may be wrong, and pick back up where you messed up, acknowledge that you messed up, even you could address that or whatever, and keep moving forward. So back to my analogy where that person who's lost someone is going to be going through something. So as a friend, it's really easy to send those initial texts, you know, support them for the first week, go to a funeral, and then kind of like move on with your life and like act like it didn't happen and just want to live your life. But what a good response would be if you were a good friend is to continue to remember that that person is going through something, continue to check in on their mental health, continue to support them, continue to also just be mindful that they are struggling or that they are going through it, and that they're going to be in different seasons and express different emotions. And so to just always be aware of that and acknowledge that and not act like it's not happening. And in that same analogy, you know, as a human, you're gonna mess up. It's really easy to forget that someone is struggling, or to go back to your own life and forget that your friend has lost a parent or a family member or a sibling or whatever. But you then remember and then you come back, right? You can even apologize if you said something insensitive. You can just say, hey man, like, I haven't been thinking about this from this way, I'm sorry, or like whatever. But you're on this journey, and that the hope is that you're committing to be with that friend through all seasons of life and continue to walk with them in that. And last thing I do want to say about that comment is, especially when it comes to wanting to be a friend and an ally and all of that, my battery's about to die, so I'm gonna have to wrap this up. But also just think about the space that you are creating for your Black friends. If you are finding yourself realizing or thinking like, like another thing about race, do we really have to make things about race? Like, why do we always have to talk about this? You're friends with a Black person. And so again, until America changes and the world changes and life is different, that is going to be the narrative, and that's going to be what they're going to have to talk about, and how, when situations like this come up, what we're pointing it towards and all of those things. And so if that's too much for you, you might want to consider what that impact is going to do on Black people, especially if you vocalize that. Because what you're essentially saying is that their Blackness is too much for you, or like you only want to have 80% of them, but you don't want to deal with the 20%, or like something like that. And that's really hurtful and really harmful. And that's honestly why a lot of Black people sometimes stay away, because white people have made them feel like that. So be mindful of that as well, because like I said, that is just really, especially in a friendship that's supposed to be two ways, that is something, by allowing them to be their full selves and recognizing that their life is different, and this is the narrative that we're gonna have to talk about because of this is the country and the world that we live in, that also speaks volumes, and that's huge. So okay, I'm gonna wrap this up because my thing is blinking at me like it's like time to go, you talk too much. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope that it just helped you guys get to know me a little better, that you got to see where I came from and my experiences. Like I also said, this is just my experience, what I went through, and that's going to be something different from someone else, from someone else, from someone else. And I'm also a woman, could be different from a man's experience and all of that stuff. So don't take this video and kind of think like, okay, that's, you know, what it is. Like, definitely prioritize listening to other Black voices, other Black creators, other Black artists, whatever, people, business owners, everything like that, because everyone has a story to tell, and I promise you, you will get something from everyone else's story. So if you guys have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comment box below. Okay, the camera seriously hates me at this point, but basically I was just saying, if you guys have any more questions or want to ask me anything or whatever, do it in the comments below. The only thing I ask is just be respectful. There's power in the delivery, okay? But yes, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye guys.